What if I told you the most powerful empire on earth, richer than anyone else, producing a third of everything made in the world, wasn't defeated by armies, navies, or revolutions, but by a flower, a single plant that turned emperors into beggars, and a global superpower into a nation carved apart by outsiders? This isn't a myth. This is the story of how opium brought China's greatest dynasty crashing down. Imagine ruling the most powerful country on the planet for centuries, a nation so wealthy that it held control over nearly 1/3 of the world's entire economy. Foreign kings and rulers were practically begging just to do business with you. Now picture watching that same empire collapse because of a single plant, not guns, not cannons, not some advanced new weapon. No, just one flower. A plant that ended up bringing an entire civilization to its knees. This isn't some work of fiction. This is the true story of how opium shattered China's greatest empire. Back in the 1700s, China stood as the world's undisputed economic superpower. European monarchs desperately wanted Chinese goods, but the Emperor of China, he shrugged and basically said, "We don't need anything you outsiders make." Fast forward just 100 years later, and everything had changed. China was being carved apart by foreign powers. Millions of its people were hopelessly addicted to drugs, and its imperial system, which had lasted over 2,000 years, was collapsing. So how did this downfall unfold? Quick thing before we dive in. If you enjoy listening to these kinds of stories regularly, hit that like or subscribe button. And hey, I am always curious where people are tuning in from. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is right now. Kinda wild to think some of you might be eating breakfast in England while I'm here in the States recording this late at night. All right, let's roll back the clock to Qing Dynasty China. But wait, get comfortable first. Seriously, adjust those pillows, grab a blanket, and settle in. This story is worth it. The year is 1800. The sun rises over Canton Harbor in southern China. You wake up in a dark, cramped room you've rented near the bustling waterfront. The heavy mix of salt water, spices, and humanity drifts in through the window. Outside, the harbor is alive, merchants shouting, wood creaking, metal clanging, as ships from all over the world unload their treasures. Unlike the soft memory foam mattresses you're used to today, you're lying on a wooden board with a thin mat that does absolutely nothing for your sore back. The air is already sticky and humid, and you haven't even gotten out of bed yet. Welcome to Canton, the only port in all of China where foreigners are allowed to trade. And right now, there is no place on earth with more money flowing through it. Hold on, you might be thinking, weren't European countries the richest at this point in history? That's probably what your school textbooks made you believe. But no, far from it. In the year 1800, China's economy was so massive that it produced more than 1/3 of all goods made on the planet. Just imagine that. One single country making 1 out of every 3 products in the entire world. It would be like if today's United States, Japan, and Germany combined into one economic superpower. European merchants were desperate, literally begging, to be allowed to trade with China. And China's answer? Pretty much, no thanks, we're fine. The emperor saw Western kingdoms as nothing more than barbarian states with nothing valuable to offer the Middle Kingdom. But what about Europe's inventions? Well, from China's perspective, they'd already invented almost everything worth inventing. Paper, Chinese. Printing, Chinese. Gunpowder, Chinese. The compass, Chinese. Porcelain so fine you could see through it, and silk so luxurious The European nobility went broke trying to buy it. All Chinese. So when foreign merchants arrived in Canton, they weren't treated as equals. In fact, they were barely tolerated. The entire trade system was designed to keep them at arm's length. Here's how this works, a local official explains as Western traders arrive. Foreign merchants are only allowed to do business here in Canton, nowhere else in the empire. They may live only in designated buildings outside the city walls, called factories. Not actual factories, by the way, more like trading houses. And the rules for foreigners, brutal. They couldn't bring their wives or families. They weren't allowed to learn Chinese. They couldn't travel deeper into the empire. And most importantly, all trade had to go through one special group, the licensed Chinese merchants, known as the Hong merchants. And at the very top of that system was one man, Hakwa. Now, when I say rich, I don't just mean successful businessman rich. I mean the richest man alive at the time. His personal fortune, about $26 million back then. Doesn't sound jaw-dropping today, right? But adjust for inflation, and you're talking multiple billions. This man was so loaded that his vaults were literally overflowing with silver. In fact, during a fire in 1822, witnesses swore they saw streams of melted silver running through the streets as his storage rooms went up in flames. That's how much wealth we're talking about. Picture this. You're down at the harbor watching a British East India Company ship unload. Among the chaos, there he is, Hakwa himself, dressed in fine silk robes, standing with his hands folded neatly behind his back. Around him, an army of clerks and assistants rushes to move crates filled with silver. That's how the system works, whispers a nearby merchant. We bring silver. They give us tea, silk, and porcelain. And really, it did sound simple enough. Europeans and Americans couldn't get enough of Chinese luxuries, especially tea. In England, tea had gone from a novelty to a full-blown national obsession. The Chinese, on the other hand, had zero interest in European goods, so the West kept paying in silver. But there was a problem. This one-sided arrangement was draining Western treasuries dry. We can't keep shipping all our silver to China, the merchant mutters. England's running out of the bloody stuff. You could see the frustration on the British traders' faces. Sure, they made money selling Chinese goods back home, but the trade imbalance was bleeding them. They desperately needed to find something the Chinese would actually buy. And that's when everything changed, because they did find something that would flip the system upside down. Opium. Off in the harbor, you notice a strange ship anchored without any flags. Local Chinese give it a wide berth, but under the cover of night, small boats quietly row out to it. That, the merchant explains, is carrying Turkish and Indian opium. Technically illegal in China, but you get the idea. He shrugs. Now, opium wasn't exactly new to China. For centuries, it had been used in medicine, usually swallowed or mixed into a drink as a remedy for pain or illness. But things changed when Europeans introduced a new method, smoking it. Come on, the merchant says with a grin. I'll show you. He leads you through the crowded streets until you step into an unmarked building. Inside, the air is heavy with a sweet, acrid haze. Men recline on wooden platforms, their eyes half shut, as attendants prepare pipes. And these pipes aren't ordinary tools. They're crafted like works of art, long, elegant stems with polished metal bowls. You watch as an attendant heats a tiny ball of sticky, dark opium until it bubbles, then carefully places it into a pipe for a waiting customer. One puff, the merchant explains, and your worries disappear. 2 puffs, and you're floating. 3, and you're in paradise. What you're seeing is the very start of something catastrophic. Right now, opium smoking is mostly confined to the wealthy elite. Officials, rich traders, men with time and money to spare. It's a luxury, even a status symbol, but not for long. The merchant leans closer, lowering his voice. The British East India Company has plantations across Bengal now. They're producing thousands of chests of opium every single year. He nods toward the harbor. And guess where it's all headed? A single chest of opium contained about 140 pounds of the drug. By the year 1800, roughly 4,500 chests were being smuggled into China. That's more than 630,000 pounds of opium, and demand was only growing. The next morning, you return to the harbor. The scene is chaotic, goods flowing in every direction, silver pouring into China, luxury goods flowing out. On the surface, it looks like the most successful trading arrangement in the world, but beneath it all, the entire system rests on a knife's edge. Off to the side, a small group of British merchants stands apart from the crowd, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. You recognize one of them, William Jardine, a former ship surgeon who has reinvented himself as a merchant. Beside him is his partner, James Matheson. These two Scotsmen would go on to establish Jardine, Matheson and Company, an empire built on one of the most profitable drug smuggling operations in history. The Chinese want to trap us here in Canton, Jardine says, but with fast clipper ships, we can run opium all along the coast. What you're watching is the blueprint for what will soon become the most successful narcotics operation the world had ever seen. And the Chinese government, they have no idea what's about to hit them. Back in the trading house, you observe the delicate balancing act of commerce. The Hong merchants, China's official middlemen, are in an awkward position. Yes, they're enormously wealthy, but they're also squeezed between two powers: the foreign traders they deal with daily, and the imperial officials who demand strict obedience. The Hong merchants are personally responsible for the foreigners' behavior, ensuring taxes are collected and rules are followed. Someone nearby comments, "Ḥakwa's no fool. He's moving much of his fortune overseas with the help of his American partners. He doesn't trust Beijing not to seize it." A wise move indeed, because the system that made him the wealthiest man on earth is about to collapse. Later that day, you receive an extraordinary invitation, a banquet at Ḥakwa's mansion, hosted for his American trading partners. This is an honor almost never extended to foreigners. His home is breathtaking, elegant gardens, priceless antiques, and a dining hall laid out with more dishes than you can count. The banquet goes on for hours, course after course of rare delicacies: bird's nest soup, shark fin, pigeon eggs. 15 courses. An American merchant whispers, shaking his head. This meal alone probably cost more than most people make in a year. What's striking, though, is the relationship between Ḥakwa and these Americans. It isn't just business. Over time, they've built a genuine friendship rooted in trust and mutual respect. The Americans help manage Ḥakwa's overseas fortune, and in return, he gives them advantages in the Canton market that few others could dream of. As the night draws to a close, Ḥakwa lifts his glass. "To prosperity and friendship between our peoples," he declares. Everyone drinks, but beneath the smiles, unease lingers. The Americans know what's coming with the opium trade, and they're conflicted. One of them, Robert Bennett Forbes, would later admit in a letter to his wife, "I made my first fortune by the same." By the same, he meant opium, while acknowledging in the very same breath that the drug was corroding minds, destroying bodies, and draining China's wealth. The merchants were already growing rich, but they had no idea just how much richer and how much more destructive the trade was about to become. That night, you return to your cramped room. The wooden bed digs into your back as the sounds of the harbor drift through the window. Canton is still the jewel of global commerce, the beating heart of world trade, where rivers of wealth pour through the hands of men like 𝙃𝙀. But something has shifted. The balance of power that favored China for centuries is starting to tilt. Within the next decade, the amount of opium entering the empire will increase tenfold. The drug will spread beyond the elite to ordinary people across the land. And silver, once flooding into China, will begin flowing out. Far away in Beijing, the emperor sits in his palace, unaware, or maybe unwilling to see, that his empire is facing an existential threat. Not from armies marching at his borders, not from enemy navies offshore, but from something far more subtle, from a flower, from the milky sap of the poppy plant, boiled down into a sticky resin that delivers the most intense euphoria humans had ever known. That night, as you drift towards sleep, the humid air pressing down on you, another smell seeps in through the window, the sickly sweet smoke of opium. All around, behind closed doors and hidden in back rooms, more and more Chinese are taking up the pipe. The addiction is spreading quietly, relentlessly, and with it, the seeds of destruction are being sown. Not with the clash of steel or the boom of cannons, but with the soft hiss of smoke drawn through an ornate pipe. Out in the harbor, moonlight glints off the sails of new ships arriving in Canton. On the surface, there manifests list silver, cotton, wool. But hidden in secret compartments are thousands of balls of opium ready to flood into eager hands. Each chest stamped with the insignia of the British East India Company, the very institution once entrusted by the British Crown to manage trade, now transformed into the world's largest drug cartel. You close your eyes, sweat clinging to your skin, realizing how fragile it all is. How something as ordinary as a trade imbalance and something as simple as a flowering plant are about to change the course of human history forever. Tomorrow, Canton will wake as usual. Merchants will haggle, ships will unload, silver will flow, but no one realizes that the entire system is teetering on the brink, that this golden age of Chinese prosperity is about to end, and it begins here, with a pipe, with smoke, with dreams, with addiction, with opium. The fog rolls across Canton Harbor as a new day dawns. 10 years pass in the blink of an eye. It is now 1830, and everything has changed. What you're about to see is no longer just the story of a drug. This is the story of how the world's economic order flipped upside down in barely a generation. For centuries, silver poured into China like an endless river. Now, it gushes out like a severed artery, draining the empire at a pace that would leave any economist speechless. And maybe you're thinking, how bad could it be? Isn't this just a few people smoking in hidden dens? Wrong. Picture this. You're walking through a narrow alley in Canton. The smell hits first, that cloying, bittersweet haze of opium smoke that now clings to every corner of the city. You duck into what looks like a simple tea house, but inside, it's anything but ordinary. The room glows dimly, lit only by oil lamps. Smoke hangs in thick blue layers, heavy enough to blur the outlines of the people around you. Wooden platforms line the walls, covered with rough bamboo mats, and on them, dozens of bodies lie sprawled. But it's not just the wealthy elites anymore. It's everyone. A government clerk, his official cap tossed aside, leans back and drags deeply from his pipe. Next to him, a dock worker, once strong and muscular, now frail and wasted from choosing smoke over food. In the corner, a woman who once owned a thriving silk shop stares blankly at the ceiling. Even a Buddhist monk, still dressed in saffron robes, lies motionless, lost to the haze. "What happened?" You whisper to the attendant preparing another pipe. He shrugs. "Cheaper opium, too much of it. Anyone can afford it now." And he's right. In 1820, around 4,500 chests of opium were smuggled into China each year. By 1830, the numbers had skyrocketed. Nearly 20,000 chests of opium were entering China every year. That's about 2.8 million pounds of the drug flooding into the empire annually. But it didn't stop there. By 1838, imports doubled again. 40,000 chests. That's 5.6 million pounds of opium pouring into a single country every year. To put that in perspective, we're talking about 2,800 tons. Imagine the weight of 500 elephants worth of narcotics slipping into China year after year. Stepping out of the opium den, you spot a group of British merchants deep in conversation. Among them is a familiar face, William Jardine. A decade ago, he was just another ambitious trader. Now, he's one of the wealthiest men in all of Asia. The new clipper ships are incredible, Jardine boasts to his partners. From Kolkata to Linton Island in just 32 days. The Chinese patrols can't touch us. His partner, James Matheson, nods. We've got warehouses stacked on Linton now. Local smugglers handle the rest. Linton Island, just outside China's territorial waters, had become the nerve center of the opium trade. Western ships would anchor safely offshore, beyond the emperor's reach, and hand off their contraband to Chinese smugglers. Those smugglers ran it up the Pearl River, straight into Canton, and deeper inland. If you're thinking this sounds like 19th century DoorDash for drugs, you're not far off. But the real brilliance, or the real evil, depending on your perspective, wasn't just the smuggling network. It was how the British solved their original problem, the crushing trade imbalance. Here's how it worked. British merchants grew opium in India under the tight control of the East India Company. They shipped it to China and sold it to smugglers for silver. Then, with that very same silver, they bought tea, silk, and porcelain, the treasures Europe craved. In one swift move, the balance flipped. Silver, which had flowed into China for centuries, was now gushing out at a terrifying pace. Inside a meeting hall, you witness Hakwa and several Hong merchants gathered together. The mood is grim. The price of silver has doubled in just 10 years. One merchant laments, "Our currency is collapsing." Hakwa's face is heavy with concern. The provincial government demands we halt the trade, yet their own officials are the biggest customers. Another merchant shakes his head bitterly. "My cousin's entire village near Suzhou has fallen to the pipe. The fields are empty. No one works anymore." This was the devastating reality in regions consumed by opium. Farms abandoned, workshops silent, people selling everything, tools, furniture, even their land, just to afford another pipe. Walking through Canton, you can see it too. A city once gleaming with prosperity now looks weary, crumbling around the edges. The merchants and shopkeepers who once seemed comfortable now appear thin, hollow-eyed, desperate. "What's happening to the city?" you ask a local shopkeeper quietly. He glances around before answering in a low voice. Silver leaves, nothing comes back. Even the officials struggle to collect their taxes. The economic toll is brutal. China's currency was tied directly to silver. As it drained away to pay for opium, the value of money collapsed. Prices soared. Imagine waking up one day to find the US dollar had lost half its value in just a few years. That's what the Chinese were living through. The sun dips low as you wander further from the harbor. In a quieter neighborhood, you come upon a modest home where a family is sitting down to dinner. The tension inside the small home is suffocating. Father hasn't come back again, a young woman murmurs as she sets bowls of rice on the table. He's at the smoking house, her mother replies, her face heavy with lines of both age and worry. Your brother too, the daughter adds softly. 3 days now. He sold his fishing nets. She pauses. What happens when there's nothing left to sell? The mother has no answer. Scenes like this were repeating in countless homes across China. Families torn apart, livelihoods destroyed, the very fabric of society unraveling, one pipe at a time. Meanwhile, across town, the atmosphere couldn't be more different. Inside the offices of Russell & Company, one of the largest American trading firms in Canton, the mood is celebratory. We cleared $200,000 on the last shipment, a merchant boasts, scanning his ledger. Turkish opium doesn't match the Indian stuff in quality, but the margins are better. Another man frowns. My father writes from Boston, questioning whether this trade is moral. The missionaries are sending home reports of the suffering. His colleague waves the concern aside. Moral? Warren Delano made a fortune in this business, he says, referencing the grandfather of a future U.S. president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. No one in America questions his integrity. Why should we be any different? He's not wrong. The truth was harsh. Fortunes made in the China trade, much of it from opium, were fueling America's industrial revolution. Railroads, factories, universities, even libraries were financed with money rooted in human misery. Some of America's most respectable families owed their wealth to opium. Look, the merchant insists. If we don't do it, the British will take the whole market. At least we're bringing some of the wealth back to America. The rationalization was as old as greed itself. If I don't, someone else will. The next morning, at Canton's harbor, you sense a shift. Chinese soldiers patrol more aggressively. Officials search ships with sharper eyes. The emperor in Beijing has finally noticed, your local guide explains. Then, almost in a whisper, but it's too late. Too many are involved now. Too many officials are smoking themselves. This was the terrible irony. By the time the imperial court understood the scale of the disaster, much of the bureaucracy charged with stopping it was already addicted. It was like asking alcoholics to enforce prohibition. Later, in a tea house near the waterfront, you overhear a heated conversation between two Chinese scholars. The barbarians bring poison and take our silver, one says bitterly, and our own people help them do it. What do you expect? His companion snaps back. When I was magistrate in Jiangsu, my superior was smoking 3 pipes a day. How can laws be enforced when the law enforcers themselves are enslaved by the pipe? The first scholar leans in. His voice drops. Do you know what I've heard? In the interior, some villages are planting poppies. Our own soil now grows the poison. It was a frightening new development. Domestic opium cultivation was beginning to take root, especially in the Southwest. Still small compared to imports, but a sign of just how deeply the drug economy had penetrated China. Across the room, a group of British merchants raised their glasses. "They blame us," one says, gesturing toward the scholars. "But it's their corrupt officials who allow this trade to thrive. We're just businessmen meeting demand." "Exactly," his companion agrees. "Nobody forces them to smoke. It's their choice." "Their choice," a third merchant echoes, though his eyes drop to the floor as he says it. The hypocrisy is staggering. Back in Britain, opium is strictly regulated, dispensed only as medicine. The very idea of an opium den in London would spark outrage. Yet these same men, who would be horrified to see it in their own streets, feel no shame in profiting from thousands of dens thriving here in China. As evening falls, you wander back toward the waterfront. A small Chinese smuggling boat rocks gently as its crew loads cargo. "Where are they headed?" you ask a nearby porter. "To meet the foreign ships off Linton," he replies matter-of-factly. "They'll return with opium." "Aren't they afraid of being caught?" you press. The porter chuckles. "Caught? The patrols are paid to look the other way. And if one captain tries to play honest, the smugglers simply wait until his shift ends." That night, from the window of your room, you watch dozens of small boats glide silently into the darkness. By dawn, they'll be back, stuffed with chests of opium bound for dens and private homes across Canton and beyond. The next morning brings urgent news. An imperial edict has arrived from Beijing. The emperor demands harsher action against the trade. In a tea house, you overhear local officials murmuring anxiously. "The emperor doesn't understand," one says. "If we truly crack down, half the city would riot from withdrawal." "Oh, and where would we find the money to pay our soldiers?" another adds bitterly. "Tax revenues have already collapsed with the silver crisis." Here lies the central dilemma. The opium trade is now woven so deeply into southern China's economy that ending it would trigger chaos. Yet allowing it to continue only drains more silver, more strength, more lives. Later, you come across a Western doctor running a modest clinic near the factories. Most of his patients are Chinese, many hollow-eyed, frail, and unmistakably addicted. Physical toll is brutal, he explains between patients. Chronic constipation, loss of appetite, muscle wasting. But dependency is the true prison. Once hooked, the body can't function without the drug. Withdrawal is agony, vomiting, diarrhea, unbearable pain. Can they recover? You ask. He sighs heavily. Some do, with care and support, but most never make it, and relapse is always waiting around the corner. Night falls again, and the cycle repeats. Smuggling boats vanish into the darkness. Dens fill with desperate customers chasing escape. Silver slips out of China, coin by coin, tale by tale. In his lavish home, 𝙃𝙧 sits alone at a desk, pen in hand, drafting letters to his American partners about moving his fortune overseas. Even the richest man in Canton can see the writing on the wall. The empire that made him powerful is unraveling, and he intends to save himself while he still can. This is how empires fall. Not in the clash of armies, not in a single fiery battle, but slowly, quietly, as wealth bleeds away, and a people lose the strength to work, to innovate, to hope. As you close your eyes that night, the sounds of Canton feel different than they did 10 years ago. Heavier, tired, fading. There's a sharp edge to the city now, the steady, confident hum that once defined the world's busiest trading port has shifted into something anxious, unstable, like a storm brewing just out of sight. Far to the north, in Beijing, the emperor sits with report after report spread before him. declining tax revenues, rising addiction, silver hemorrhaging out of the empire. His patience is running out. Very soon, he will make a fateful decision to send one of his most trusted officials south to Canton, charged with ending the opium trade by any means necessary. But the truth is, the damage has already been done. Addiction has sunk its claws deep into China. The silver is gone, the economy is shaking, and the people are unraveling. Whatever happens next, the course of history has already shifted. The stage is set for a clash that will not only transform China, but the entire world. The Opium Wars are coming. In Canton, the weather seems to echo that sense of foreboding. Dark clouds gather over the harbor, thunder rumbles in the distance, and through the crowded streets, a solemn procession makes its way forward. At its head, the new imperial commissioner, carrying the emperor's mandate. It's March 1839, and everything is about to change. And that's where we'll leave it for now, right on the edge of history. The storm clouds over Canton aren't just weather. They're the beginning of a conflict that will reshape China and the world. If you've been hooked by this story, make sure to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter in this epic tale. Trust me, what comes next, the Opium Wars, is even more dramatic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.